Bom, boa tarde, quinta-feira, né, um dia bonito lá fora, terminando um pôr do sol fantástico. A gente vai ter mais um evento aqui da Corenet Global aqui no Brasil. Hoje a gente tem uma figura fantástica aqui da Interface. A gente tem um grupo grande aqui de pessoas da Interface que estão participando do nosso webinar. A gente vai falar com o Mikhail Davis. Eu tive um call com ele ontem, muito bacana. Agora eu vou fazer o switch, né? Eu vou começar a falar o inglês aqui para a gente botar o Mikhail na conversa, né? Mikhail, sorry for my fast Portuguese. I know it's not easy to understand. In fact, probably you'll not understand most of the words. But first of all, I just would like to say welcome to Brazil. We are talking about yesterday that nowadays the only travel that we can do is a wireless travel. So we are almost traveling to our country, and you see a lot of Brazilians here that are participating in our webinar, eager to listen to you and to learn about Biomimética. So now it's your turn, and Luis will help you. I will check the chat all the time to see if you have any kind of questions, and if you have any question that you can do in the middle of the presentation, fine. If not, I do in the end. Okay.
Obrigado, Renato.
Great Portuguese, I love it. Now you must learn a caipirinha. The rest is we don't need. It's obrigado caipirinha. The rest is
just water for now.
Great.
Yeah, I can help you in Spanish, but Portuguese is if you speak really slow, and I really concentrate, I can understand a little. But we were talking, Claudia and I, about my visiting Brazil this year. This is as close as we're going to get. So wonderful to be in Brazil with you all. So this is, as Renato said, it's going to be a bit different than some of the other topics in corporate real estate. This will really hit on innovation. And, it ultimately does come down to some things that really can, improve costs and efficiency and some things we're used to be thinking about in corporate real estate. But we really have to go a bit wider and look at a lot of different places we aren't normally used to looking for solutions to find these new approaches. So we will tie it back to corporate real estate where we can, but this is really a whole set of questions that applies to innovation in all different areas. And we'll talk specifically about some of the applications in real estate. But it's really, we're going to give you just a little bit of the methodology for innovation from biomimicry and then from biophilic design, which is a related discipline that applies directly to buildings and real estate. Really what we are asking, and this is how we're framing it, what would nature do? That is kind of the one way to understand biomimicry and biophilic design, is to say, okay, for whatever problem we're solving, whether it's a problem with people and real estate or product design or whatever we're solving, what would nature do? Because one of the things we find when we delve into this is that nature, comes up with solutions that last, that are proven out over time, that, the things that didn't work, got recalled. As in all of the life forms where their strategies and their designs didn't work, all of the living things, they went extinct. So biomimicry is really so this is the kingfisher, which is a wonderful example of biomimicry. The design of the noses of the trains in Japan was actually based on watching the kingfisher and resulted in far less resistance for train travel and more efficient trains in Japan from looking at how the kingfisher, which dives into water, what is the shape of its beak and how does it manage that turbulence of going between air and water. So biomimicry broadly is an approach to innovation that seeks sustainable solutions to human challenges by emulating nature's time-tested patterns and strategies. So these are, we are leveraging the fact that life has been evolving for billions of years and has evolved these brilliant strategies, which sometimes are quite different than the strategy we're using to solve a similar problem. And so we have to translate between how nature does it and how we're trying to solve that problem and say, wow, can nature show us some fundamentally better and different and more sustainable way to solve this same problem? So we'll talk about some examples of that. So fundamentally, when you're going into, asking your problem, so insert your problem here and saying, biomimicry is asking, how would nature? And then we have to come up with the right question to ask nature. We'll talk a bit about that, but asking the right question, a question that we can really look at living things. And when I say nature, we really mean living things. We're not talking about rocks so much. We're talking about looking at living things and the systems of living things as a design, and what can we learn from how it is designed and how it accomplishes certain functions. So of course, for Interface, where we got into this, we made in the mid 1990s, we made this big commitment to try to become the world's first sustainable company, to try to become a company that had no negative impact on the environment from how we operated, which was a challenge because we make plastic flooring, traditionally made from crude oil and other unsustainable sources. So early on, we had no idea how to do this. We had made a big public commitment to this. We encountered some of the people who were creating this new discipline called biomimicry. Most of them were biologists. And we asked them, and this was early days in the late 90s, we asked them to take all of our product designers out into the woods. And what they asked, our biologists asked our carpet designers to go out in the woods and think about how would nature do your job, which of course in this case is designing flooring. So we started with this question, how would nature design a floor? So review here, we invented modular carpet. So modular carpet either is supposed to look, traditionally it's supposed to look like squares or rectangles and repeating patterns, or it's supposed to just look like broadloom carpet, just one, seamless field. It could look like a repeating pattern of a grid, square, but it all again has to be identical. This is the old paradigm of how you design with modular carpet. Now, this is what, of course, modular carpet is never supposed to look like, because if it wears poorly, then when you decide, oh, I want to put in new tiles on the area that I, put a hole in the floor or I spilled something, then the new tiles, as in this picture, stand out and it doesn't look good. It looks like a patch. It looks, it looks ugly. So how do we have to avoid this? Back to our designers out in the woods, at which point the designers in the woods are thinking, oh my goodness, the heads of our company have gone crazy. Why are we walking through the woods? We designed carpet. But they started to notice things as they were walking in the woods. They started to notice the patterns in nature. When you looked at how nature does floors, or nature does textures and colors, it's completely different than how we were used to thinking about it for flooring. When you look at the green of leaves in nature, it's never just one green. It's always multiple greens because of shadows and different plants and different levels of maturity of the leaves. It's never just one brown, never just one gray. So what you started to see is there was this randomness where there was a similarity where you look at the bark of a tree or the leaves of a plant and it fits together. It's beautiful in a certain way, but it is not the same. It is not a repeating pattern. It does not look like squares and rectangles. So this really started to change the thinking of our carpet designers. And so what we took was this principle from nature of similarity but not sameness, these non-repeating patterns. We ended up designing, this was back in 1999, a product we called Entropy. It's now a whole category of products we call I2. But the idea is it was these random pattern carpet tiles. So that is still all squares, but now it looks like kind of like a flowing field, more like one of these patterns that we would find in nature. So seemingly simple innovation, but if you think about it from a manufacturing perspective, normally we are trying to create identical objects. And if they're not identical, it's a failure. It's a manufacturing defect. And so this was a whole new way to think about it, was that not the same is good, and that random is good. And so you can see, looking at this, much harder to see any sort of wear on this, much harder to see a stain. It just looks like part of a random pattern. So this ended up being a game changer. This first product, Entropy, every tile is different in pattern and color. It made them mergeable, so you could take products made 5 years ago and put them down today, and the colors would look the same because they were all random. You wouldn't have this issue of, normally have an issue called dye lots, where when we make a green product 5 years ago and we say, oh, it's the same green, but it's really not. When you put it next to each other, if it's not from the exact same batch of dye, the green is a little bit different. Now, when you have randomized and mixed colors, you end up with mergeability. You end up with the ability to put down any two tiles next to each other and it still looks good. So it also decreases waste in installation, versus normal. If you use broadloom carpet, if you use 12-foot or 6-foot goods, you're going to have a lot more scrap when you're installing. You're down to 1.5% installation waste for this style of carpet. Reduced, so people could buy less carpet because they knew they could always go back and buy more if they needed more. They didn't have to buy all of their replacement carpet at the same time to keep the dye lots the same. Manufacturing waste, if we made a teeny tiny error in manufacturing, it's fine. It's just part of it's part of the randomness. So it created all of these efficiencies from this simple insight that we didn't need to have repeating patterns. We didn't need to have sameness. That's not the way nature would design a modular system. So again, this was our best-selling product, and we've gone on to expand this line. And we started with different colors. Still, you can see in squares and rectangles, where when we talk about biophilic design, right angles, squares and rectangles are always an accident in nature. They do not happen. It is not the way nature builds. And of course, we love to build our buildings straight up and down in right angles. That is not the way nature designs. So that's really interesting to notice. So it took us a while in advancing our technology, but now we can create products that have broken out of the square. You can hardly tell they're a square. And that just required us to get better technology. But now we can create things that look even more like nature, but it's still the same idea that they're random, they're mergeable. You can put any tile next to any tile, and it will still look good because of the lessons we learned from sending our designers out into the forest. So going from how would nature design a floor, let's move up to the next level. How would nature design an office? What can we learn about that? And so if we think about would nature design an office like this? And you can start to see even now some of the principles here. What you see here is repeating, sameness. Probably not, based on what we learned from looking at the floor, probably not how nature would design an office. Right now, we're going to quickly distinguish these two concepts. Biomimicry, which we talked about, this whole sort of innovation methodology for looking at how do we translate our challenges into something nature could help us solve. Biophilia is a related concept. Biophilia really talks about bios, life, philos, both from the Greek, meaning love of life. So biophilia was a hypothesis developed and famously publicized by Professor E.O. Wilson of Harvard University, where he hypothesized that humans had an innate attraction to living things and anything that reminded them of nature. And so what came out of that was a whole field used in design and construction of biophilic design. And how do we leverage the fact that humans have this innate response to living things and to nature in how we design? So biomimicry you could call generally mimicking and emulating nature's design principles to solve human problems. It's this very broad methodology. Biophilic design is mimicking and emulating nature's impact on people in our built environments. What is nature's impact on people? What are we trying to, when we take on biophilic design? It has been proven by all of these medical studies that people who have regular contact with nature experience all of these health benefits. Improved stress recovery rates. So when you have a stressful event, going outside, being in nature can help you recover from that much more quickly. Lower blood pressure, improved cognitive function. So you will think better, you will solve problems better. Enhanced mental stamina and focus. So you can focus on your work and you can work longer if you have access to nature or spaces that make you feel like you're in nature. You even have evidence of decreased violence in communities that have access to nature. Elevated moods, people feel better. Increased learning rates, that's been very important in educational facilities. So ultimately the goal being, could you feel like this in your office? Could you feel like you do when you're going for a walk out in nature in a park while you're in the office? And that fundamentally is, in the simplest possible terms, the challenge of biophilic design. How do we take these principles of what makes us feel like this when we're in the park and translate them into how we design the office so that we will feel and have all the health benefits of being in a park or being in nature? So I'm going to play you this video. This is one of the big corporate champions and Corenet participants that has taken on biophilic design is Google. So we got them to record us this little video where they explain their work in biophilic design, which is really some of the cutting edge work.
Google is interested in biophilic design because we're really interested in thinking about what are the strategies that really help people to perform at their best. We want people to not just be productive when they're here and writing more lines of code faster and better, but how do we have people who wake up in the morning feeling really energized and excited about the day ahead? Our workplace vision is to create places that just really feel wonderful for people to be in, places that are vibrant and multi-sensory and really just touch at our soul and make us excited and inspired every day, but also that support not just doing work, but support life. A lot of that comes back to what are the spaces that historically have been inspiring to humans. And if you ask anyone what's their favorite place in the world or the most inspiring place they've been to, very rarely will they tell you it's their office cubicle. We have three primary strategies when it comes to biophilic design and how we incorporate that into our space. The first is natural elements, such as light or water. The second would be natural patterns or natural analogs, which might be forms of complexity and order or other forms that replicate nature in some way. And the last would just be elements of the space and the place. So we might think about prospect and refuge, where we have broad and distant views, but also from behind and overhead, we feel protected and safe. I think there's a lot of emerging science and knowledge about how do we create spaces that are serene and calm and really help people feel relaxed and de-stressed. We know how busy life is. We know how much we expect of our people. And we know that it's not just about how does it impact people when they're in our space, but we know that the spaces that we create have a really lasting impact on people throughout their entire lives. And that's a huge responsibility. It's also a great opportunity for us to be the best company we can possibly be.
So hopefully that worked and everyone was able to hear that. But getting a company to tell it in their own words is better than anything I could do to explain all of biophilic design to you and why companies are investing in this. Now, I sit near Silicon Valley in California, where Google is headquartered, and can tell you that the competition for talent is so fierce here. Everyone is trying, especially for the computer programmers and engineers, they're trying to hire the same people. So they are looking for any advantage they can get in making their offices and their spaces better and more appealing to attract this talent, to get these very talented programmers to work for them. So biophilic design has really been part of this, and you've seen it, come into new spaces at Facebook and all some of these other companies that are competing with Google for the same talent. So this is a report I would recommend to you if you want to dig into this, 14 patterns of biophilic design. If you look, you can see I have it on my wall right here too. But this was really a brilliant work done by a consulting firm. Bill Browning is one of the world experts in biophilic design. And so you heard Anthony from Google use slightly different words, but we're talking about nature in the space is what we tend to think of. Can we bring literally elements of nature into the space, whether that be light or water or plants, that are literally the exact same thing that we would have outdoors? Natural analogs are things that are like nature, that remind us of nature, whether it's these shapes. As I said, in biomorphic forms, nature doesn't particularly use right angles or squares or rectangles. How can we introduce curves? Can we introduce more of these forms that are more like forms you would see in a living organism, whether it be a leaf or a jellyfish or anything? You'll notice none of them have squares. There are no square-leafed plants. So material connection to nature, materials, whether it be stone or wood or other materials that are literally the same material you would find in nature, people respond to those very differently. There's actually quite a bit of evidence. And then complexity and order is almost using the mathematics of nature, where we look at, for instance, those checkerboard 1-2 patterns I showed in carpet tile, never used in nature. That is not a mathematics. That 1-2 checkerboard is never used in nature. Now patterns of 3 are used, other fractal patterns. So there's actually a mathematics in it, and people are proven to respond differently to these nature-inspired patterns that use more of the mathematics and the patterns and designs of nature. Even if the form isn't biomorphic, if we have squares that are in patterns of 3, people respond to it quite differently than squares and patterns of 2, which is not used in nature. Finally, nature of the space, and Anthony alluded to several of these, prospect and refuge. These are the spatial relationships in the office that architects have been using forever, and they appeal to people, and everyone from Frank Lloyd Wright and every other famous architect uses these. They haven't thought of them as biophilic design, but these are these age-old, very biologically ingrained, appealing spatial relationships where we have your back is covered. You're in a high point where you can see out. These are things that humans have been looking for since before we had buildings. We all want the security of having your back covered. We want to be able to see what's coming up. Prospect and see what's coming up. Refuge, my back is covered, I feel safe. Now the other ones that get interesting, and Anthony talked more about these soothing qualities where we're getting people to be less stressed, more calm. The other aspect when we talk about mystery, risk, peril, 13 and 14 on this list, are we want the spaces to be stimulating in the same way that a walk in the woods is. We want people to be occasionally surprised or to be curious. So a little sense of mystery. If you think about the number of high balconies we have, where it's safe, you have a handrail, but you can look off the edge, risk, peril. It's not actually dangerous, but just enough to be interesting, to stimulate you, to get your brain working. So spaces that, that can do that are shown to have an impact on how productive people are at work simply because their brain is working better. So here's just a couple facts, and there's another report that I'll show you that has all of these, and this is where we start to get into return on investment for putting some of these features in. There's another report called The Economics of Biophilia by Terrapin Bright Green, the same consulting firm, where they showed that absenteeism, so people show up for work more often to biophilic spaces. If you were able to give them natural light, you're able to give them access to fresh air, some of these things you would find outdoors. Now, the picture in this is the Genzyme headquarters in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They went a bit further. They have fountains and plants and all of these other biophilic features, lots of wooden stairs. So you can go even further, but just having these basic things has people show up for work 10% more often, which of course saves you a lot of money. On the flip side, there's a term we call presenteeism, which is you show up for work, your body shows up for work, your mind maybe not so much. So people are more productive if they're in these spaces that are more like being in nature. People actually are more present mentally and do better work if they're in these kinds of spaces. So there's been some great post-occupancy studies done on this with regard to different aspects of biophilic design, which of course is going to save you a lot of money if your employees. So however much you spent on your building, you're spending more on your employees. So if you can, by using biophilic design and learning from nature, increase their productivity, have them be able to do better work, that's going to be money well spent.
And this is positive responsible is applicable for all the ages, Mikhail, because like my friend Juan Gallardo is pretty much old like me. They ask if you would there be any reluctance from old timers, that some people like the tradition. I like the green. I visited the Google headquarters, the main one in San Francisco. I feel very good and very nice to be inside the office that people think about green. So we saw some even simple things like I saw some meeting rooms that the carpet was green. It was pretty much better than gray, like simple things. But I feel much better than other meeting rooms.
Yeah, and the important thing, I'm just going to go back to this, is that I like about describing these as patterns or principles, is that it's not one aesthetic. So you can really accomplish these same things in very different looks. It doesn't have to be trees everywhere. You could bring in these same effects in different ways. That's also why we have 14 patterns. You know, the bringing in trees is one of the patterns. You know, that fits within one of the patterns, but we could do something different with the light. We could, you know, do something different with the biomorphic forms. There's, even in spaces that you look at and you say, oh, there's no way this could ever be biophilic. You can find one or two of these patterns. We have a customer in New York City that made their meeting rooms. It's literally, all they changed was the wallpaper and the carpet. The wallpaper is a view of Central Park in New York. It's like a giant photo. And then they chose an interface carpet that looks like grass. So it looks like you're walking into the photo. And otherwise it's a completely normal conference room, but it's great. It's biophilia. It's very cheap biophilia. It's very inexpensive. Anyway, I'll just refer you to these. This was a report we commissioned with some leading experts on workplace design and global impact of biophilic design in the workplace. And then the economics of biophilia is another great one. These are both very relevant to office space and have some great numbers in terms of how the dollars and cents add up to really improved employee experience and thus better employee retention, better employee recruitment, better employee productivity. And humanspaces.com will get you to our blog that has a lot of this information on it. So I'm going to step back. So we talked about designing a floor, designing an office. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how would you design a building or even a city, looking at it through this lens of biomimicry. And so this is Janine Banyus, who's really one of the co-founders of biomimicry. She says, when the forest and the city are functionally indistinguishable, then we know we've reached sustainability. Now the key thing there, and this is a key concept we talked about a bit in biophilic design, but also in biomimicry, we are trying to mimic the function. What does it do? What does nature do? So we have to ask, if we want them to be functionally indistinguishable, you can't tell them apart, they perform the same function, what is nature doing? What is nature's function? So this is a key concept called ecosystem services, which just means the benefits that people obtain from ecosystems. So usually they're free, so we don't notice them, but you know, clean air, clean water, all of these things, healthy ecosystems. You know, you may be living in the city, but there's an ecosystem somewhere that has pre-cleaned your water for you, and that is regulating the climate. You know, so in Brazil, a lot of Brazil, the climate is regulated by the Amazon rainforest, even if you're nowhere near the Amazon rainforest. So this is just a list of some of the things that nature does for us, even if we don't notice. It moderates weather extremes. It purifies air and water, pollinates crops and natural vegetation, so we have food, creates soil, detoxifies wastes. There's lots of things in nature that are toxic, but we never notice them because nature has already, you know, broken them down into non-toxic materials. This is kind of the criteria if we want to say, how can we be as good as nature or functionally indistinguishable? We got to learn to do this. We got to have our buildings and our cities learn to do these things, as well as perhaps the forests or rivers that used to be there. So one of the ways that we get on the track to this, and this is will be the very short version of this, the biologists have gone and distilled down what are the principles by which all living things are designed. They call them life's principles. So this is a quick glance. You can find this online, but there are these 6 macro principles, the larger areas around the edge. And then inside there's these sub-principles where we can look for ideas on how do we redesign our systems to fit with how nature would do them. How do we make our systems more generous and to provide more to society, which is under the heading of be resource efficient. So we're going to try to be very efficient with our use of materials and energy, and that translates very quickly into money, of course. Fit form to function. This is kind of a strangely obvious one, but oftentimes we will choose a shape, you know, and how we build something and say, oh, well, that was just the easiest way to do it. In nature, there are no accidental shapes. You know, each of these birds has exactly the right beak for what it needs to eat. So it has this function. This one needs to pick berries off of trees. This one needs to swallow fish whole. And the form of their beak and the design of their beak is exactly fit to that function, which we don't always do. We sometimes do things, oh, that seems kind of pretty, you know, that's nice. But of course, the most beautiful thing is something where it's beautiful aesthetically and it's very functional. And it's the thing that makes it beautiful, kind of like birds' feathers or their beaks, also are what make them effective and functional. So here's another one. This is be locally attuned and responsive. This is really important to thinking about how we adapt to change, which of course in corporate office space, we're having a lot of change to adapt to right now. But you look at some of these ecosystems. This, of course, is the Atacama Desert in this particular picture is from northern Chile. And you look at it and you say, well, there just isn't very much life there. It's a hard place to live. But really, there's plenty of life there. It's just very adapted to this particular environment. And more importantly, when this environment changes, now the Atacama Desert is, of course, the driest desert in the world. It sometimes goes 10 years without raining. But when it does rain, of course, the one day that I was ever in the Atacama Desert, it rained. Local people didn't believe me. I said, it rained, or no. It rains every 5 or 10 years. So they didn't believe me. They're like, nah. But when it does rain, the life that is here is ready. So when we look at that picture before, you don't see necessarily any life, but there is seed banks. There are animals that are highly adapted to no rain, and they're also highly adapted to taking advantage when it does rain. And this is how we have to, I think about our buildings, is how do we design them from the start to be adaptable to these cyclical changes, so that we thrive and we're ready when change happens. Not that we're completely disrupted and thrown off and losing money, but that we're actually ready, like this desert, to thrive and to put out flowers really quickly and to take advantage of that rain when it does come. So this gets to this issue of resilience. How do we maintain function even during a disturbance? This is one of the core aspects of life's principles. There's a number of them that fit in this idea of resilience. So if you just look at, our traditional, any farm field, whether it be, soybeans, or these are potatoes in this case, could literally be the same plant for hundreds of hectares. And if you have a disease that happens to really be tough on that plant, it will kill all the plants. And its function, which is to provide food, will disappear completely. Now, if you have a field that more closely resembles this natural field, which has hundreds of different species of plants, all with different strategies, if one of those plants gets knocked out by a particular disease, the functions of this field, which could be to hold the soil, to create new soil, to grow food, all of those things are maintained even though there's been a disruption with a disease. So we talk about diversity. We like to talk about diversity in a social context. From a biodiversity or diversity, what we learn from biomimicry is that systems that value and cultivate diversity are more resilient. If we only have one way of thinking, or people from one kind of background, or plants of one species, a disruption can knock the whole thing off. Whereas if we have diversity, we're going to have a lot of different strategies. We're going to be able to adapt to change much more quickly because we have all these different resources, all these different kinds of people or plants or whatever kind of diversity we're looking for. So again, this is another one, almost something we have to unlearn. We think we know that nature has a lot of competition, and we watch the nature videos where the lion is hunting the gazelle, or it's lots of things attacking each other and competing with each other. It turns out when you really study, over 90% of relationships in nature are cooperative, because it takes a lot of energy to compete. So nature only competes when it has to, and cooperates every other time because it's far more energy efficient. If I can get along and share resources and cooperate, it's actually far more efficient at the system level. We all do better. So this is just a classic example, Finding Nemo. We've got this anemone that the clownfish lives in stings everything else, but the clownfish is immune to it. And then there's things that want to eat the anemone, but the clownfish will chase them away. So they have this cooperative relationship. And I think we're starting to see in some of our shared economy spaces, really some of the economic benefits. If we do cooperation and sharing of resources well, it's far more efficient for all of us. We all benefit. So finally, this is a favorite example from Janine Benyus's first book, Use Life-Friendly Chemistry. Nature has these miraculous materials that we still haven't figured out the spider web, which of course is made, from chewed up flies. So it wouldn't seem to be a very fancy material, but what comes out of the end of the spider is stronger than steel. It is tougher than Kevlar, which we use to make bulletproof vests. And of course, it is wildly flexible. It's more flexible than nylon or any of these other fibers we have that are very flexible. And different countries' militaries have studied this, and no one can quite figure out exactly how it, because of course, the other thing that you lose if you figure out how to make materials like spider webs is you lose all of the crazy toxic chemistry that is used to make Kevlar and even steel, and the amount of energy and heat and pressure and all of these environmental resources that go in to make our normal materials. And the spider makes it all at room temperature out of flies. So there are still many miracles to unpack in nature with regard to the materials it uses.
Quick question, Mikhail. There are two questions that maybe it's the right opportunity. One is from Minae. So she's asking if Interface is using biomimicry principles, we know into their your industry, but also in their team's processes internally, with the organization of the teams, offices, and so on.
On the first question, I would say definitely yes. We are still using biomimicry principles. I would say, just in my experience, that what we've done within our organization in terms of organizing people, probably less so. There are a few things I could point to. We really have looked a lot at kind of the adaptability and flexibility of our systems and how we organize people. We did a whole process in our factory to have, it used to be you had specialists who only knew how to operate one machine, and that is definitely not how nature would do it. And so we just started doing what we call cross-training, where we had people learn multiple things and switch around. And it created a lot more resilience to where we didn't just have, oh, Susan is out sick, we can't run this machine. we had this functional redundancy, is what we would call it. And multifunctional people. So there are small aspects. I think there's a lot more that we could do. There's a whole amazing world of biomimicry for social innovation that speaks to all the things that you can do in organizations when you think in systems the way nature does. The biggest thing we're doing, and I can talk about it a bit more later, is we are looking at how would nature make things. Nature would make things out of carbon dioxide, would make them out of carbon, not out of rare, and carbon taken from the atmosphere, just like these trees in this picture, sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, making wood, making leaves. We're trying to get on a path to making our products that way, to either through a man-made process that sucks carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, or through using the power of plants and algae and other organisms, use those materials to make our flooring, and thus be capturing carbon in our materials, just as every living organism does, especially trees and algae and plants. So that's probably the biggest way in which we're trying to mimic nature.
Right. And there's another question from Flavia Seco, more related to how can companies who want to start this transformation using biomimicry in their offices, what will be the first steps to start doing it? Okay,
that's a great question. And I won't be able to give you the whole answer right now, but the other thing I want to make sure you know is that there is a very active biomimicry community in Brazil. I did the Arizona State University now has a biomimicry program. One of my colleagues who did the degree with me, Gianni Brocco, is leading Biomimicry Brazil now, trying to put together all the people interested in biomimicry to work together on bringing biomimicry to different aspects of problem solving in Brazil. So this is, if you think about biomimicry as a design methodology, the first thing you have to do, so to answer the question, if you want to solve, you have to first of all say, what is the challenge that we're trying to solve? And so you can look at this, and I've circled, identify the function. So if you can say, you know, you want to identify, so the office, maybe you could say, we are trying to create a diversity of ideas, or we are trying to, you know, optimize the use of resources within our team. You have to find, the first step is to figure out what is your functional challenge, and to start to phrase that in a way that you could look for examples in nature that also do that. So if we were, for instance, to say, share resources within a team, you could look at, you know, tree species that are all connected to each other underground and do this amazing job sharing resources. So even if you literally could have a forest where there's a drought in one part of the forest and no trees die because the other part of the forest shifts water through the roots and through the fungi underground to the dry part of the forest. So again, the first thing is to identify this function, which again, we talked a little bit about getting to your, what is your challenge? And then it can't be, you know, we want to know how to set up workstations most efficiently. Nature doesn't have workstations. So we have to change the language a little bit and look for, okay, functionally, what is a workstation? It's a physical space that enables productivity or something. And so then you can start to get it into, there could be, you know, different ways that organisms or ecosystems in nature create spaces for maximum productivity. Now, it turns out a lot of that question is just put people in something that resembles nature, and that's biophilic design. Nature says the answer is put people in nature. So that's kind of circular, but
yeah.
So again, it gets down to, the first thing you have to get is to the right question. And then you can start looking, and I'll give you actually, let me, this is the other thing I would do. Start looking at this website, asknature.org. It has a lot of it has a lot of organisms that have been studied in terms of cool ideas you can get from these different, you know, creatures or plants or systems. It has a bunch of ideas of things that have already turned into products or been implemented in a company. So you can see someone here someone searched for produce color. I'm looking for new ways to produce color. Nature has a lot of fascinating ways to produce color. But again, you have to get your question, to work on your question, and usually it takes a couple times to get your question right. The other thing, once you get your question, and then you're gonna come back to life's principles and start to think about, okay, looking at life's principles, which of these principles applies to my challenge? For instance, and this was very lucky because we didn't know anything about biomimicry when we started, and we were already making modular carpet, but modularity is one of life's principles. Designing in modules, and again, rather than designing in these big pieces where if one breaks, the whole system falls down. If you design in small modules, if you think about, we're made of cells. So if one cell fails in our body, no problem. Now, if we were made of big cells or these big pieces, one of those fails, we probably don't survive. But, you know, building modular, so again, we got lucky, we were already making a modular product, but that is an example of one of the things that life's principles would tell you, you know, design for using modularity, you know, using nested systems, design for resilience, things that can be changed when the environment changes. So again, life's principles are another place I would look in terms of beginning to look to nature for new approaches to whatever your challenge is. And the only other thing I'll say is there's a number of books on biomimicry if you want to learn more, one of which has even been published in Portuguese. I don't know how easy to find that book is now, but it does exist in Portuguese. But these are, if you want to get into, and especially Janine Benyus's book does get into some of the science more. Depending on how much science you want, you can skim those sections. It's still a really very well written, inspiring book. The Shark's Paintbrush is a little simpler, still with a lot of great examples of biomimicry in the world. And then I will finish with it. Their biomimicry, as I said, is alive and well in Brazil. This is one really brilliant product they're developing with a couple of designers based out of Rio. called Nucleario. It's a way to dramatically increase the success of reforestation. So the problem is, reforestation happens in these remote sites and difficult places where there's armies of ants and there's grasses that crowd out and kill seedlings once you plant them. So you might plant 100 trees and you'll be lucky if 50 survive. And the only way that any of them survive is people continuously hiking out into the forest and watering them and spraying pesticides and herbicides. So this is basically a self-maintaining tree capsule, and using all of these principles from, different organisms in nature to design this totally new way to have an essentially automatic maintenance for replanted trees. So could be a game changer in terms of making reforestation cheaper and more successful. And again, finally, the journey is very much in biophilic design, you can see you can make things that look like biomorphic forms, patterns of nature. Obviously this carpet style was inspired by moss growing on the floor. But ultimately we want to get to where functionally our flooring can do what nature does. So this flooring over here on the right, the actual moss, it is not a low carbon product like ours. It is made from carbon dioxide. The moss actually sucks up carbon dioxide and builds moss. We always like to have low VOC emissions so that we're not putting off any toxic materials into your office. This moss is not low VOC. In fact, it is off-gassing oxygen. Wouldn't it be nice if your floor in your office made oxygen? So there's still so many things we can learn. We'll be launching some products that have net carbon negative emissions, where literally the process of making them took carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Again, that's very much inspired by how nature would make a floor. Nature would not make a floor that puts out less carbon emissions. It would make one that takes in carbon emissions, that actually traps carbon. So that's really what we're inspired by and striving for, to mimic not just the look and feel of nature, which is biophilic design, but also the function of nature, which is biomimicry.
Yeah, Mikhail, thank you so much. I think one of the questions for Flavia, how we can, what are the first steps? I think it must to show the gain and a lot of benefits from the biomimetics and biophilia, right? I think it is the first step, right? Show to the board that this is the positive impact if you have this in the office. I think it's something that we can use, right?
Yeah, and I think those are very important to just get permission to try. You have to show there is this benefit. There are companies like Google and others who are showing real money is being made and real progress is being made using these strategies. I think for corporate office, biophilic design is probably more immediately relevant, where you're going to be able to make the case, this matters for offices. Biomimicry is more for innovation in general. And you can take on any number of challenges and say, how could we do this better? Let's ask nature. But I think in terms of immediate application, biophilic design, like I said, you can do it very cheaply even. Let's change the wallpaper and the carpet.
Yeah. There is a great question from Marilia. Marilia, you can ask the question yourself.
The question is if you think this look and feel based in biomimicry, thank you, can be an attractive factor to the talents after the pandemic, because we will have a lot of people working from home. Maybe can be a nice attractive factor to the new talents.
I would certainly think so. There are specific strategies, and we're starting to get into them, for getting people to return to the office. People are going to be anxious returning to the office. There's a certain amount of stress. That is one of, if you have an office that uses biophilic design, one of the things biophilic design does is reduces stress. But it also will just make it more attractive. If a company wants people to use their offices, make the offices better than staying home. And so I think there's a lot of ways you can make the offices more appealing and make people feel less stress about this, you know, uncertainty of returning to the office. So I think that would definitely be where I would focus, is looking at what are the biophilic design changes we can make. And there's a lot of ones that are very simple and they can look a lot of different ways. But the key thing for biophilic design is how it makes people feel. Ultimately, that is a successful biophilic design, is if people feel stimulated but less stressed. If they feel energized but calm. Those are what we're looking for. And of course, the interesting thing now is people like Google have gone and monitored this. They will literally put sensors on the people and monitor their stress levels and then see, when we change the office in this way, how are people's stress levels? What is their heartbeat doing? You know, if we put a light meter around their neck, if they get more natural light, are they more productive that day? And of course they are. So I think in terms of, I think biophilic design could play a very important role in that. I mean, obviously there's still a lot of kind of basic cleaning and maintenance things we need to make sure in order for people to feel safe. But in terms of the feel of the office, in terms of decreasing the worrying, because part of it's physical. We can keep everything clean, we can keep people socially distant, but people are still going to be worried. And that's, I think, what biophilic design can help with.
Yeah, I just would like to share something to you, Mikhail. Marilia, thank you for the question. Was great. But just would like to share to you an example. Can you see my screen? Yeah. So this is the CTE office. Adriana is one of the members of our board for Corenet Brazil. Invite us to be on this office space to make a meeting. And to be honest, it was great because of you can see here the carpet. I think it is interface one.
It is.
And to me, it looks like I was in the square. I was not in the office space. So I feel the office very cozy and no stress. So we have a very long meeting with our board. And after that, you just walk in the office. It was very, very nice. You know, you can see a lot of these principles that you told, and maybe Flavia can use it as an example to present for your company. Say, hey, this is something that we can implement. That's not so fancy or spend a lot of money. It's a kind of carpet, I think, that you can put that to create a sensation that you are in the square, not in the office space, and looks great. I think the people from CTAs it's lucky people that work in an office like this one, that people thinking about biomimetics and biophilia in the office space. So I think it's a great example that people can use.
So Mikhail, I have another question. Two recent projects, one from Amazon, well known, the geodesic design from their, let's say, side office out of Seattle with these rainforest, right? Yeah, that one. And the other one is an airport, if I'm not mistaken, in Singapore, where you have where the people wait for the airplanes. There is this waterfall, and there is a local like a rainforest in there. Do you think that's those are examples that where we can let's say bring the outside inside, and the inside actually becomes the outside, like the image you have from the carpet on the left and the actual forest on the right? That reminds me from Lord of the Rings, the kind of site, right? So do you think that's one thing that we may look at really closely in the future? And in the end, we'll create this like a rural countryside, urban, kind of no boundaries.
Yeah, I think, and I would encourage people to look on Pinterest or whatever image sharing look under biophilic design, because there are so many amazing examples. And I only gave you a couple, but I have a whole, different course on biophilic design. But all the different ways you can do it. I would say that the Amazon, and then the Amazon headquarters in Seattle, and Singapore, any number of different places, but the airport is certainly impressive. Those are extreme examples. Those are not low-cost examples, but
Yes.
It are really amazing how far you can take biophilic design. If there is a capital city of biophilic design, it is definitely Singapore. The examples from Singapore, like we do a biophilic design global design award every year. With this hospital in Singapore won one year, and it's just amazing. And they've really taken this idea and all of the studies that are in the economics of biophilia and other reports that show that people heal more quickly in biophilic environments. And they created a whole hospital. There's literally a fish pond in the middle of the hospital. Is essentially you are, going to the doctor in the rainforest. So you really can take it very far, or you can keep it very simple. But the good news is that there's evidence that even the very simple stuff works. It's not as dramatic as if you have a tree in your office, but even having a picture of a tree has some effect on people biologically. The most famous study was a hospital wing where they were doing all the same surgery, and they realized that once they controlled for all the variables, they were all people of about the same age and the same health profile. The people in a room with a view of nature, just a view out to the tree outside the window, recovered a full day faster than the people with a view of nothing, or with no window, or with abstract art. But then the interesting thing was that the people who had an image of nature on their wall, actually recovered a half day faster. So it wasn't as good as having a view of the real tree, but just having a picture of a tree actually produced an increase in their healing. And this is kind of the rule of thumb for biophilic design: is the real thing is the best, and follow the principles, and use the shapes, or fake nature also works. So whatever we can do.
You trick the brain.
Yeah, it tricks your brain, it does.
Yeah, amazing, Mikhail. So Mikhail, I'd like to thank you so much to participate to us. Unfortunately, was not able to send to you a drink because you are so far. But I promise you, man, when you come to Brazil, you have a free drink, and from Luis, of course. It's not myself. It'll be from
You
Luis.
can experience you're gonna be able to experience the full set of drinks from Drinking on the Pot.
Yeah, exactly. All the kinds. It will be fun. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
I
coming.
look forward to that.
Yeah, and talking with us was priceless. A lot of people send a very good comments here in the chat and questions, and we recorded the conversation. We'll put in our YouTube that the people can access there. And I just would like to say thank you so much to you, to all the interface team. We had here Silvana, we had more. Exact. Sorry, I forgot the name. Was the drink, I think, but it was very good to have the people here, and see you guys in the next week. So was great, and Inae for the idea. I love it. Inae was very good, and next time we will bring more ideas for Inae to the people. Learn more and more about the biophilia, biomimética, and how to make the office a better place to the people work. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much, Mikhail. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe. Mikhail, watch out for the smoke. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Take care, everyone.
Obrigado, Mikhail. Tchau, pessoal. Até mais.
Bye.